Okay, Pat, we're recording your session whenever you'd like to start.
Can everybody see that okay?
You'll need to go to full screen on your slides, Pat,
Yeah, just hang on.
and I'll go on mute.
Okay. Can everybody see that okay now?
Yes, sir.
All righty.
Looks good, Pat.
Thank you. Well, here we are. I just thought I'd throw this in here as a picture. It's not particularly my layout, but this is designing an O-scale layout to depict 3 scenes in a 22 by 14-foot room. I'm going to be doing it a little bit different than Paul. He is more or less into operations. I'm a little less into operations and more into scenery and a small amount of operation. So we're going to move on. I'm going to bring up the next slide. Here's the overall design of my layout. Just to give you some idea, I have had to deal with, I wanted to deal with a full run of locomotive and trains around the outside of the walls. This is the outside of the wall right here. And I have 3 corners to deal with. And I wanted at least a 48-inch radius in this area right here. And the least amount, it would be a 36-inch radius in this area right in here. Most of my switches that I used were, or turnouts were handlaid. And I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8. And they're all run by slow motion switch motors. Yeah, I wanted a passing siding, so I added it into this section here where the station is. And I ran into difficulties with the entrance. My entrance to the room is right here, and the door swings in that direction. So I had to design this part of the layout to accommodate just the part of the door. So when you open it, you don't see the city. That's where I put the city, right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and divide this into 3 sections. I'm going to concentrate on the 3 sections. This is the first section right here. Then there's the peninsula I built right here. And this is the 3rd section here where the sawmill and planing mill are. Okay, I wanted to make it so that you couldn't see the rest of the layout when you first came in the door. So I had to put in a view, a block view for the rest of the layout when you first came in, so you couldn't see it at once. And this is a mountain that I put in here, right along this section right here. In designing the room, I had to make sure I had enough room to do my work, put in my work desk. And I also had to have enough room for the doorway to the furnace room. Fortunately, the doorway to the furnace room opens to the inside of the furnace room, so I didn't have any problem in this area. When I was doing the electrical, I designed electrical to go all the way around the layout. I have at least 12 plugs along these 2 walls right here. Okay, I'm going to move on. Here's a picture of the bench work. Design is important, and it takes time to figure out what you're doing before you even start. I asked a couple of people to give me a hand with the design, and I did get some help and some ideas. And in the process of doing so, I added some of my carpentry skills to putting in the base of the track work. I used Baltic birch because it's more stable than regular plywood, and it's 1/2 inch thick. And in order to get that radius, I took and made myself a compass out of 1 by 2, and I had it at least 4.5 feet long. I put a nail in one end and I drilled a hole in the other end, put a pencil in at least 4 feet up. So I had my center line for my 4-foot radius. And then I drew it on the plywood, cut out these sections. And once I got one section cut out, I kept using that same section all over the sheet of plywood to make more sections. So when I laid it down on my L-girder bracing I made, I was able to get an idea just how the curves were working out. As you could see right here. Now, where I had to join them, I used 1x2 or 1x4. These are all 1x3. I used 1x3 boards underneath to join the pieces together and make them sturdy. I have no problem with movement on my layout as far as that goes. And the L girder is plenty strong enough for the legs. Here's a close-up of the one section with the station and the Valley City. I had one spur I put off here. And there's a number 5 switch here and a number 6 curve turnout here. This one here is for the logging area. And that's what the city looks like. And this is like a passing siding now. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. Here's the peninsula. I wanted to put in a coaling tower, which you can see here, and the water tower, a turntable, all this stuff made for a problem, because what happens is you're limited on the size of the turntable you could use. And I scratch built the turntable to fit this. A switcher can go on to this turntable track and no problem at all. It will fill up maybe 3/4 of that track. But I was limited to having a regular sized turntable in this layout because it would have taken up too much room and I would not have any space to go around it. Right over here, you can see the trestle. There's a straight trestle and then another truss bridge in the background. Here's a close-up of the track work leading off of the turntable. And designing this, I used mostly all hand-laid track. Everything I put in this, about 90% of it's hand-laid. As you'll see in some of the pictures, there's some of the ties I did, but I just glued them all together here in a pile. Here is the trestle I had to put in place in this section right here. It proved to be a problem because I had to join it onto the curved turnouts to go into the yard as well as on the main line, and also go into the lumber yard, which was in this area here. That proved to be a real problem, but it worked out in the long run, as you can see right here. And all the track work is all hand laid in this area. And the reason why I used hand laid track was it made it simpler to lay and adjust it as according to what I needed. If you had it at 3-foot sections of Atlas track, you'd be limited as to what you could do with it. And in the case of hand laying, this made it a lot simpler. You can see where the back of this area here is. The track work was on a rise of 2%. And it came around the wall on this side and back around this way, and then down here. And then on the front here was the main line. And this is where that curved trestle was placed. And you can see it here. And you can also see some of the backdrop that I was putting in. That was one thing I found when I put this backdrop in. I had to figure out how I was going to do it so that I could have mountainous areas all the way around the layout. That's why I call it Valley City. It sits in a valley in the middle of BC. There it is there where I was employing the curved trestle. It shows you the entrance on this section right here, where this curved, right after you leave the curved trestle, you enter into a number 6 curved switch or turnout. which goes into your yard afterwards. These are the kind of problems you can run into. I found the base of my layout was mainly made from Homosote. It gave me a good sturdy base to work with. Screws and nails worked pretty well in it. Electrical was another thing. Your layout depends a lot on the electrical. And I had my son-in-law help me out with this. This is a easy DCC track system, power system. And what I did was I devoted this power system, which has its own transformer right here, strictly to the track work. And I used the same house wire on every bit of the underneath the layout. I ran the bus line all the way around in house wire. It gave me plenty of power for O scale without any problems in running. This is all radio controlled. You can see the aerial or the aerial from the system right here. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple to wire up. I did over here, I needed a test track to set up for setting up engines with their decoders. And I designed it in such a way that I could shut off the track completely or turn the track on for decoding, setting up the decoders, or turn it on to the power of the track, which was a double pole, double throw center off. Here's the system here. Now this system will run 2 locomotives on their own, but I chose to use a radio control system along with it. They have their own system to go with it. You can see here I had my lights are all separate. If you go back, I'll go back one. You'll see this transformer right here. I had to design it in such a way that my lights and my turnouts would operate separately. And this one transformer that I've got right here runs all of my turnouts. And it goes to the bus bar, and from there it goes around the layout to run the slow motion switch machines. Here is the peninsula again. The original design of the peninsula came up to here when I first did the layout. Well, then I realized I needed a turntable, so I had to add on to it just for the turntable. But then when I added on to it and put the turntable in, I found out that I was running into a problem for staging track to put the locomotives on from the turntable. So then I built another section right here that was a bookshelf, and you'll see that in a minute. And you'll see also where I hand laid, where I was using these patterns here from, from online, from the tracks, scale tracks, whatever it is that you can buy them from or get them from. And I copied them and used them to give me help with designing the turnouts in this area. There's that bookshelf I was talking about. I added
What's
this
the ketchup
section.
for?
Pardon me?
What's the ketchup for?
Ketchup.
You have the picture.
Just a second. Huh. In that container is full of ties. That one and another one right here. See, I had to design tie. I cut my own ties, so I cut them so that they worked out for the turnouts. So I had to have all kinds of bags full of different size ties. As you'll see here, there's some there, and there's all the bags of the different size ties that I use for these turnouts that I had made. So that gives you a good idea what they look like when I made those turnouts. See, I had to run another turnout right here to go in to the coal yard at the coaling tower. And then along the other side of the coaling tower, I had to put track work going down along the side to fill up the locomotives with. There's some of the ties there. I stained them all. There you are right there. This shows you a good example of what I was doing when I hand laid the turnouts and added my own ties to them. You can see the different lengths of ties right here. These two things here I had made by a friend of mine who has a machine shop so that I could gauge my track. I found he designed it in such a way that it was narrow enough for me to use on curves. You can't buy these, you have to get them made. I had them made to fit the rail perfectly. So I used like 2 of these, and then I would spike this certain area right here. Then I would move it ahead and do the same thing. So it made it simple. There's a whole conglomeration of stuff you end up using. It was fun. These are all kinds of shims that I use in certain parts of the track so that they would meet the turntable properly. You'll see some of that right here. You see where this is higher and this was lower. This is the bookshelf. Oops, I'll go back. This is the bookshelf I added on afterwards. And it happened to be a bit lower than the original where the turntable was. So yeah, I had to add another tie underneath this. You'll never see it when it's finished because I added enough dirt and ballast and that so it covered up most of it. But you can see where I came in. I had to go underneath the coal tower and then along the side of the coal tower. Another problem I ran into on the other side was I had to add a piece to the side of this in order for the locomotives to be far enough away from the coal tower so that these chutes, when I dropped them down, would be in the right spot. So it made it a little more difficult if I didn't do that. When I put these ties in, I had bought myself a small pin nailer. And if you look closely, you can see the little pin nails along the track. Well, it made it a lot easier for me to nail the ties down. I nailed the ties down with a pin nailer. And then, of course, I put my track on and I nailed them on with spikes. There's a close-up view of the turntable. It was extremely fun trying to figure out how I was going to make this thing operate and also run on that track I made all the way around the inside, that oval. I ended up getting it right, but it was a lot of fun designing the power source to this. Because as you turn, your power source changes. You hit positive to negative, then back to negative to positive. So it makes it a little more difficult. So we're back to where we started. If there any questions, please ask, because I know I ran through this pretty quickly. I didn't want to make it too long. It's not as complicated as what Paul's got, but as you can see, each section. So that's it, fellas. If you need to ask any questions, go right ahead and ask.
Pat, would you be good enough to turn off your screen share? Then everyone can see everyone else.
Okie dokie.
If there aren't any specific questions for Pat, does anyone want to talk further about the topic of planning and problem solving? Are there approaches or techniques that people have learned through work or just years in the hobby that they would care to share with others on this call?
I think everybody here has already got the layout started, so.
Well, people are
well-
making changes like you did with the peninsula. Yes, John?
Yeah, I'm just new at this at the hobby. so I'm here trying to absorb as much as I can. And where would one go to find a prototype to work with to start for some? My concept is a shelf layout uh, to start with, and I'm limited with my space as I have, so it's um, I can't. I don't think I can make anything over like a any curves or anything like that. So I'm wondering where would I go to start to look for something that would be a prototype that I could go from to try and plan a layout.
Anyone wants to jump in with suggestions?
Yeah, if he goes to the NMRA website and brings up track construction and go into small layouts, small layout designs, I'm pretty sure he'll find something in there that he would like, or give him an idea if he wants to design his own for the space that is available to him.
John, where do you live in Ontario?
I live in a rural area between London and Chatham.
I can't remember the name of the author. George or a couple of others might with better memories than mine. But there's two books that have been published probably back in the 1980s on fallen flag railroads in Ontario. Now, they would be suitable if you're interested in steam and older history. Does anyone remember? I want to say Brown, but I suspect that's my faulty memory. Some of you, I've got the book, but it's upstairs in another room. So there are those two, and certainly, John, if you contact me, I can send them to you if you'd like. Send you the titles if you'd like more. I'm sorry, I'm not more helpful now. Growing up, or as you find yourself today, are there any particular aspects of a prototype railroad that piques your imagination, gets your heart running?
Well, yes, I grew up in the area, like with the New York Central, with two lines running through the village and the Chesapeake and Ohio. So they were all, that's where I started to admire, I guess, more than anything, railroad operations. But all the trackage has been ripped up now. It was the old Canada Southern line from Windsor down to Fort Erie.
Well, I'm certainly not the most experienced modeler on this call this evening. I'm just looking at faces or names here, but you sort of hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the New York Central in Ontario. I recall George Dutka, our program director, organized a meetup back during the pandemic down in St. Thomas, Ontario. And for me, it was a wonderful exposure to the very railroads, Michigan Central, New York Central. Who else used to run through there? George?
Canada Southern.
Sorry, Gary?
Canada Southern.
Canada Southern. Yeah, so, the St. Thomas area. But if you are attracted to prototypical railroading, there's just a wealth of information. The New York Central has a very, very active historical society. And I don't know what specifically they have available, but I know I've seen enough of their posts online to know that there's, if that was something that you chose to settle on, John, you could probably mine that to the point that you'd go dizzy. Ron Tuff, do you have any experience looking at New York Central data as it intersected with the TH&B?
I was just going to say, have you looked at the Canada Southern website? put out by Terry Link. There's a wealth of information on there. There's track maps, etc. As Paul suggested, I'm more interested in the eastern end of the Canada Southern as it relates to the THMB, but I'm sure there's lots of information on the west end as well, and it's all broken up by geographically, so you shouldn't have any difficulty finding the area you're looking for. I know there's extensive maps of Welland, for example, so I wouldn't be surprised there's extensive maps of other areas too.
I had a suggestion as well. This is Malcolm. If you only have room for like a shelf layout and you don't want curves, essentially you could model a town that has a small yard and have staging at one end or both ends, a small staging track where you can bring your way freight in, drop cars, and then do switching locally. And so, I mean, that would be your kind of your concept of operations you might be limited to for your space. And there's quite a bit of information in things like Model Railroad Hobbyist. Occasionally they have that kind of layout described. If you want to do it with a prototype, people have already mentioned some sources, but if you're interested in Canadian National at all, Ian Wilson has a whole series of books with all kinds of track diagrams, which actually give you the prototype track diagrams for all these small towns in CN networks, mostly in southern and western Ontario, not so much in eastern Ontario. But that's another possibility. There's also usually online for historical societies, there's track diagrams for some of the local sites that people have already mentioned that. Canadian Pacific Historical Association has quite a lot of track diagrams. So there's all that kind of information that you can wed together the shelf layout idea with doing switching in a town with a prototype layout in that town with the local industries. You're probably talking steam era, like pre-1960s, because most of the local switching disappeared once trucking became very popular. So in that era, you'd have lots to choose from.
Another concept I've read about recently is just modeling one industry. Pick a big industry like a steel mill or a paper mill or a cereal plant and just model that one industry. Staging yard supplies the train to come in. You can spend an hour or more switching that big industry and then back to staging.
Oh, well, thank you everyone for your suggestions, and we certainly can take it from here, I guess, and work away at it. Thank you very much.
John, feel free as well to reach out in the WOD network, and of course beyond, but certainly a number of the people on this call this evening are members of the division that you're a member of, and we are happy to help each other. And as we talked about this evening, not just spending time, but also having the advantage of more than one head thinking about what the possibilities are will allow you to go through perhaps a couple of iterations before you settle on one that's kind of the Goldilocks track plan, just right. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, helpful hints on track planning and solving track design problems that anyone would care to share while we're primed for this topic?
Pat, I was going to ask a question about your layout. In O-scale, how big a locomotive do you run? Like, I noticed a couple of switchers in the photographs, but what's the biggest locomotive that you run on those radius curves?
Ron, the biggest ones I have are the SW9s, SW7s.
Okay.
And also have a number of shays. I can run those. The biggest I can go is an RS1 or RS7. I do have one of them, but I haven't had it on the layout because I got to do extensive work to it. I have a Jeep 9 that I haven't assembled yet. It's one of those ones made by Red Caboose, I think it was. Yeah. I have one of their kits, but I haven't tried it on the layout. I'm very limited to the length of the locomotive I can use because of the radius that I used. My room made it difficult for me to do larger radius. And that's what most O-scale layouts do, is they have a large radius to accommodate larger locomotives, but I don't have the privilege of that sort of room to do it in. That's about all I can really use. And as far as operations, that made it difficult too, because if you saw Paul's, which is a beautiful setup, don't forget when you're in O scale, you got to figure HO is half the size of O. So you got to remember that when you're doing it. It's just that you got to remember you can't do the same thing in the O scale as you did in the HO. That's where a lot of us make a mistake. We don't forget the past. We don't forget the HO when we're doing O. So if you jump from one scale to the other, forget what you did in the other scale, because it's only going to confuse you. That's what I found.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. I've got a friend who's designing an O-scale layout right now, and the original track plan had 60-inch radius curves.
Wow.
And it's not going to fit the way he envisions it. So
No,
he's thinking he's going to drop it down to 48-inch radius curves.
But
he's got a Jeep 9 and a SW 1200. But I don't think there'll be an issue with running them on 48-inch radius curves. He's got some concerns, but
no, it won't. It won't give him a problem with those size engines. I usually make sure they are 4-truck or 4-wheel or 2 4-wheel trucks, and the steam locomotives, you want the ones with the center drivers that are, not flanged.
A blind driver.
That's right. Because when you're mentioning a smaller curve, they can give you a problem, or if you're going through the small turnouts. The maximum turnouts I have are the number 6 curved turnouts, and number 6 on, there's 1 or 2 of them that I use on the straightaway. But that's as far as I can go with it. I can't get any bigger because of the room size. And if I got too big, it would limit the size of space I have for those who are operating the layout. If you look closely at the pictures I had, you only have so much room on the right or left side of that peninsula for about 2 people at the most to operate. So the bigger you get in your turnout or your curves, the less room you'll have on your space. And I wanted a continuous run too, so that made it even more difficult. I have 3 different scenes there, which not as easy to do in O-scale in a small room like that.
His track plan is a continuous loop as well. It's in a garage, which is, I guess, what you call a 1.5-car garage.
Yeah.
Wider than normal. So it's a fair size room. What size rail did you use?
I used 148 rail from what's the name of that company?
Microengineering.
Microengineering, right.
Yeah.
I keep thinking Microengineering.
I guess he was planning to use code 100, which I think would be kind of light, but maybe
he's
not.
moving into Proto 48 when
he is. That's
that
exactly
low.
What he's doing.
Yes. So remember, you're going to have a little narrower rail if you're going to use prototype rail. The distance in your rail.
That's right.
The gauge is going to be
the gauge is slightly narrower.
That's right. So he's got to remember that's going to change the whole aspect of his layout. If you go Proto 48, you got to remember that. And your cars, your engines, it's going to add more difficulty to him. That's why I stayed where I was, because I didn't have to do too much changing.
Yeah, he's invested a lot of money in new trucks and all kinds of things.
So he's bought a lot of Proto
48.
Yeah, he's bought a lot of the stuff already.
He has.
Wow. Well, more power to him. If he can do it, give it a try. But I found the easiest way is to take a piece of plywood like I did, the Baltic birch, and cut one radius out of the one end of it. And you can take that radius after you cut it out and place it all over that plywood, and then cut out and then cut out your pieces. So you don't waste any of the plywood, and you can join those radiuses and with the straight ones. And the width I used was 3" on that,
Okay.
3". And you make yourself one of those compasses. You've probably seen it before. You drive the nail in one end and you
Oh,
drill
yeah.
a little hole at the other end.
Yeah.
Make one of those. And it really helps, especially at the one end where you put your pencil. If you put your width of your track, like the one line in the center of that line, and then the other side of the rail, so that when you put your pencil in, you're running the line exactly to the center of your rail.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
Yep.
So that's what you got to do. It makes it so much easier to lay your track work down. That might help them. I'd give them that idea. I hope
And
that
you
helps.
Ironically, Pat, I did exactly the same thing. I made a compass out of a length of string and I think a nail, and then a Sharpie at the other end. Once I determined what I wanted the radius to be on the main curves. I don't remember exactly how I anchored the pivot point, but it's pretty low tech, but it worked for me. And it was a
It
lot
does.
cheaper than these systems that I see where you go out and buy all this hardware
Oh,
that's
yeah.
specifically dedicated for nothing other than just putting in curves on a track plan.
Exactly.
Thanks, Ron. Any additional follow-up questions, Ron?
Well, and you mentioned Homosote. Did you also put down cork underneath the ties?
Yes.
And how thick?
Just the standard. What I made my own cork road bed. I bought a roll of cork from the home hardware, and I brought it home, put it on my table saw, and cut the width I needed. I
But
set
how
it on an
thick?
angle, and I set it so I had two pieces, exactly as I was cutting it. So one side would be angled, and the other side would be straight. So then
Right.
you put the two pieces together, and you got yourself the full width you need. That's
And
sure
how
a heck of
thick
a lot
was the
cheaper.
cork?
Oh, cork is nuts. Price wise, it's gone out of like everything else. It's very expensive. But if you make your own, you're going to save yourself a ton of money.
How thick was the cork?
I think it was about 1/8 of an inch.
Okay, that's what he was planning. I
Yeah.
wasn't sure whether that was adequate, but I guess if it's mostly industrial, that's probably adequate in O scale.
And you do need it if you're using plywood for the base of that.
Yeah,
You
he
have
is
to
using
have it.
plywood.
Yes. And then the Homosote helped on the flat areas where I didn't have the raised track. I had Homosote underneath, and I just put my ties right on that.
Okay.
Homosote is not easy to find.
No, it isn't.
I did find some, but I had to buy about 3 or 4 sheets he had left at the lumber yard. And then I said, well, how much is it going to cost me to buy a few more sheets? He said, you're going to have to buy a lift because that's the only way I could bring it in. A whole lift. I said, forget it.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Pat.
You're welcome, Ron. Happy New Year to everybody here, eh? Well, it's still early enough.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Any other comments? Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, before everyone goes, I'd like to admit that I wasn't totally organized when it came to talking about. I'm not as good as Paul when it comes to doing it, but I did the best I could. And I'm glad somebody like Ron asked me this question because I can, make it a lot better and explaining what I was doing.
Yeah, it is easier to answer questions
Yeah.
sometimes than it is to present.
Exactly. Anyway, I hope everybody got something out of it. One other thing I want to mention in the wiring of the layout, a lot of people who enter the layout usually use Bell telephone wire or something smaller. But I found on the bus line, you better put the heaviest you got, because if you got lots of runs, you don't have any dead spots. And when you run your leads down from your track work, I put it at every section, I put a lead down. Because if you don't, you're going to lose out somewhere along the line. Anyway, that's what I have.
Well, he's actually putting power on board in his locomotives. So
Oh,
there's
he's
no
doing
wiring
one-
whatsoever.
Oh, nice. Wow. We're talking about that on New Tracks right now. There's a lot of talk about that.
Yeah.
Running
I-
dead rail.
Dead rail, yeah.
Yeah, dead rail. Well, it'll be great when they get it to an HO size.
Well, apparently they do. They do have it, but I don't know. I don't think they perfected it enough yet to get down
No.
to the smaller sizes.
I've operated on layouts with dead rail, and it really is
Different.
amazing. It's extremely reliable.
You don't have to worry about it. If it runs off the track, it'll keep right on going.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And if you talk to somebody that works at the TTC, dead rail, you have a lot less electrocution.
Yeah. And you don't need to run extra power, eh, Paul? Oh, man. Yeah. There's so much stuff out there you could do. It's just crazy the way things are going right now.
George, you unmuted. Do you have a question or a comment?
No, I was just gonna, at the end, I'm just gonna say thanks for the presentations. I enjoyed them and,
Yeah,
you guys
thank
did a
you.
good job.
Congratulations on your new magazine on that was advertised. I thought that was pretty good.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. Wow, it's quiet out there. I don't know. Nobody got any more questions on
I would say we've probably exhausted our brain power for the evening. Look, everyone, we had 17, 18 people register for the clinic. I know, and I checked the participant list.
right now we have 11.
20 minutes ago, it was down to 12. But thank you for your expressions of interest in the topic. Again, Peter, thank you very much for proposing the topic. It's not one that I've seen in the rounds over the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not saying that there haven't been planning clinics in Ontario, but I haven't seen one before. And we will be having another live face-to-face clinic in February. And we'll be sending out notification of that to all of the WOD members in another couple of weeks. Till then,
Can I ask a question, Paul?
Stay
Did
well.
Peter-
Yes, Pat?
Did Peter get anything out of that for his old scale?
Yes, I did. I found it quite helpful because I'm just in the planning stage now and I have the constraints of room size as well. So
If you want to get a hold of me anytime, just ask Paul. He'll get
Yes.
a hold of me.
I will. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about that, Paul.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Thanks for the offer, Pat. That's great.
Yep.
Yes, until we see all of you again, hopefully in the not too distant future. As Pat has already said, Happy New Year to everyone. It's only 5 days in, so I think we have a bit of a grace period. And happy modeling and stay healthy.
See you, everybody.
Good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
And we will
thank
be
you. Good
sending
night.
out copies of the video and copies of the presentations to you next week. All the best.
Great.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.